Hey, tonight we're diving into something truly fascinating, a journey back to medieval winters, where survival wasn't just challenging, it was an art form. You're about to discover why most modern folks wouldn't last even a single day in the harshest season of medieval life. So grab a warm blanket, maybe light a candle, and settle in as we travel back in time. I'd suggest dimming the lights a bit. It'll help you imagine the flickering glow of a medieval hearth fire as our story unfolds. Congratulations! You've just woken up in a medieval village sometime during the 14th century, right in the heart of what historians now call the Little Ice Age. The good news is, you've time traveled to one of the most fascinating periods in human history. The bad news? You've arrived at the worst possible time of year, the dead of winter. As consciousness creeps in, the first thing you notice is the bone-chilling cold. This isn't the mild discomfort of forgetting to turn up your thermostat. This is a penetrating chill that seems to reach deep into your very core. The air in the small peasant house is so frigid that your breath forms little clouds with each exhale. You can actually see your breath indoors, something you've only experienced outside on the coldest days of your modern life. You're huddled beneath rough woolen blankets that scratch against your skin. Unlike your smooth cotton sheets at home, these scratchy coverings are hand-spun from local sheep's wool. The good news is, wool retains its insulating properties even when damp, which is essential because the inside of this house feels almost as humid as it is cold. The bad news? Everything in this medieval house smells of smoke, unwashed bodies, and something earthy you can't quite identify. Glancing around, you see you're not alone. An entire family is crammed into this small space. Parents, children, and what appears to be an elderly grandparent, all sleeping close together for warmth. Sharing body heat wasn't just for comfort, it was a survival strategy. In the modern world, you'd have your own room with a carefully regulated temperature. Here, human proximity is the difference between life and death on the coldest nights. The house itself is nothing like your modern home. The walls are made of wattle and daub, a lattice of wooden strips, the wattle covered with a mixture of clay, sand, animal dung, and straw, the daub. While this construction actually provides decent insulation compared to plain wood, it's nowhere near the insulated walls of your modern house. Small cracks and gaps in the walls let in drafts of frigid winter air, creating a constant battle between the heat of the central fire and the cold seeping in from outside. Speaking of fire, your eyes are drawn to the center of the single-room house, where a small fire smolders in a fire pit dug into the packed earth floor. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof that allows some of the smoke to escape. The rest of the smoke fills the upper portion of the room before eventually finding its way out. This, you realize, explains the smoky smell that permeates everything. It's also why the upper walls are blackened with years of soot accumulation. The smoke isn't just an annoyance, it's actually serving a purpose. The smoke helps preserve the thatch roof by deterring insects and small animals that might otherwise make their homes there. It also acts as a primitive form of food preservation for the herbs, vegetables, and meats hanging from the rafters. But for you, unaccustomed to living in a constantly smoky environment, each breath irritates your lungs, making you cough. As you sit up, you notice there are no windows, or rather, what passes for windows are just small openings covered with wooden shutters or oiled parchment. Glass windows would be an unimaginable luxury for a peasant dwelling during this time. Without glass, the choice is between letting in freezing air or keeping the house in darkness. Most families choose warmth over light during winter, making daytime indoors nearly as dark as night. The floor beneath you isn't the smooth hardwood or carpeting you're used to. Instead, it's packed earth partially covered with rushes, dried grasses and herbs spread across the floor. These rushes provide minimal insulation from the cold ground and are supposed to be changed regularly, but the bottom layers have clearly been here for months, harboring all manner of bugs, rodent droppings, and food scraps. The fresh herbs mixed in with the rushes were meant to provide a pleasant smell, but they've long since been overwhelmed by less pleasant odors. Your stomach growls, reminding you that even in the 14th century, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. But winter breakfast in medieval times is nothing like your modern morning routine. There's no coffee, no toast, no cereal, just a pot of pottage simmering at the edge of the fire. Pottage, you soon discover, is a thick soup made of whatever vegetables and grains are available, cooked together for hours or even days. During winter, this means mostly root vegetables like turnips and parsnips, perhaps some dried peas, and if you're lucky, a bit of salted meat for flavor. As the family stirs awake, you watch the woman of the house, let's call her Agnes, move to the fire and stir the pot of pottage. She adds a handful of precious salt, one of the few seasonings available, and some dried herbs from bundles hanging from the rafters. This pottage has likely been cooking for days, with new ingredients added as needed. It's a perpetual pot, never fully emptied, just continuously replenished, a practical solution for cooking with limited fuel. The father of the household, we'll name him Thomas, rises and immediately begins to stoke the fire. Fire maintenance is constant, critical work in winter. The family has stockpiled firewood throughout the year, but they must use it carefully to ensure their supply lasts until spring. Too much wood used now could mean freezing to death in February. The wood itself is not the neat split logs you might imagine. It's a mix of branches, twigs, and occasionally larger pieces, whatever could be gathered from the managed woodland where peasants had limited rights to collect fallen wood. "Good morning to you, stranger," Thomas says, noticing you're awake. "Bitter cold today. The ice on the water bucket is thicker than yesterday." You glance at the mentioned water bucket and see a solid layer of ice on top. This, you realize, is their water supply, hauled from a nearby well or stream and now frozen in the night's cold. Agnes takes a wooden ladle and breaks through the ice to get water for the morning's needs. The children begin to stir, 3 of them ranging from what appears to be about 4 to 10 years old. They're dressed in simple woolen garments, even while sleeping. Unlike in your time, there are no special pajamas, just the same clothes worn day and night, perhaps with an extra layer for sleeping. The clothing is rough-spun wool, scratchy against the skin but vital for warmth. Underneath, they wear linen undergarments, the only layer that gets washed with any regularity. The youngest child coughs, a deep, concerning sound. Agnes gives her husband a worried look but says nothing. You suddenly understand one of the greatest dangers of medieval winter: illness. In this era, before antibiotics or even basic understanding of germs, a winter cough could develop into pneumonia, which was often fatal, particularly for the very young and the elderly. The smoky air inside the house doesn't help respiratory health, but the alternative, cold, is worse. "Will you join us for breaking fast?" Agnes asks you, ladling the thick pottage into wooden bowls. There are no proper tables or chairs as you know them, just a low wooden platform where the family sits cross-legged to eat. There are no forks either, just wooden spoons and small knives that serve multiple purposes. The pottage is bland but filling, with a smoky flavor permeating everything. As you eat, you notice there's no fresh fruit, no eggs, no milk, all staples you take for granted. Winter in medieval times means surviving on what was preserved from summer and autumn. Fresh food is a distant memory until spring brings new growth. After the simple meal, it's time to face the outside world. Thomas hands you a woolen cloak, the medieval equivalent of a winter coat. It's heavy, somewhat water-resistant due to the natural lanolin in the wool, but nothing like the weatherproof outerwear you're accustomed to. There are no waterproof boots waiting by the door, just leather shoes that offer minimal protection from the elements, and perhaps some cloth wrapped around the feet as an extra layer. We need to check the animals and bring in more wood, Thomas explains. Every day that must be done, no matter the weather. Stepping outside is a shock to your system. The bitter cold hits like a physical force, taking your breath away. The temperature is well below freezing, perhaps around 10-15 degrees Fahrenheit, 9 to 12 Celsius. In your time, you'd refuse to leave the house in such weather without proper winter gear. Here, you have no choice. The village around you is blanketed in snow, with smoke rising from the holes in the roofs of similar wattle and daub houses. The snow isn't the pristine white you might imagine. It's dirty near the houses, mixed with ash from fires and waste from humans and animals. The paths between buildings are slippery with ice and mud, making each step treacherous. Thomas leads you to a small structure attached to the house, the animal shelter. Inside are 2 goats and a few chickens. The animals are kept close to the human living space for 2 reasons: to protect them from predators and thieves, and because their body heat helps warm the adjacent human quarters. The smell is overpowering, animal waste mixed with old straw, but Thomas and his family seem completely unaffected by it. The goats give milk even in winter, though less than in summer, Thomas explains as he milks one of the animals. A blessing, that is. Many families have no milk until spring. You watch as he collects perhaps a cup of milk, nothing like the gallon jugs you're used to seeing in grocery stores. This small amount will be a precious addition to the family's diet today. After checking on the animals, your next task is gathering firewood. Thomas leads you to a small woodpile covered with branches and old cloth to keep off the worst of the snow. The pile is distressingly small to your modern eyes, perhaps enough for a week of constant fires in your estimation. Thomas, however, has been carefully managing this supply since autumn and knows exactly how to make it last through the winter's coldest months. Take only what we need for today, he instructs, as you help gather an armload of sticks and branches. Winter is long, and the bailiff is strict about what we can take from the Lord's woods. This mention of the bailiff and Lord reminds you of another reality of medieval life. You're not just struggling against nature, but also navigating a rigid social system. As a peasant, Thomas doesn't own this land. He works it for the local lord, paying rent in the form of labor and a portion of his harvest. Even gathering firewood requires permission and is strictly regulated. The cold begins to penetrate your inadequate medieval clothing as you work. Your fingers become numb, then painful, then frighteningly numb again, the early stages of frostbite. Without gloves, medieval mittens exist but are rare among peasants. Your hands are directly exposed to the freezing air as you handle the snow-covered wood. Your modern understanding tells you this is dangerous, but medieval people simply endured it as part of winter life. As you and Thomas return to the house with your loads of wood, you pass other villagers engaged in similar tasks, hauling water from the partially frozen stream, checking on livestock, repairing winter damage to their dwellings. Everyone moves with purpose, understanding that daylight is precious and limited in winter. With no artificial lighting beyond dim rushlights and expensive candles, most work must be completed during daylight hours, which in northern European winter might be as few as 8 hours. Back inside the house, the momentary relief from the wind makes the smoky interior seem welcoming. But you quickly realize it's not much warmer than outside, perhaps 40-45 degrees Fahrenheit, 4 to 7 Celsius. The fire alone cannot heat the drafty space to what you would consider a comfortable temperature. This, you understand, is why medieval clothing was layered and why people stayed in bed as long as possible during winter mornings. Agnes is working at a small loom set up near the fire where the light is best. The oldest daughter, about 10 years old, sits beside her mother, spinning wool into thread using a drop spindle. The middle child, a boy of perhaps 7, is carving what looks like a simple wooden toy. The youngest, still coughing, sits wrapped in an extra blanket near the fire. In winter, we work indoors, Agnes explains, seeing your interest. Spinning, weaving, repairing tools and clothes, work that cannot be done when the fields need tending. You notice her hands, red, chapped, with cracked skin and broken nails. There is no hand lotion in this world, no petroleum jelly to protect skin from the harsh winter conditions. The best they have is animal fat, which Agnes occasionally rubs into her most painful cracks and splits. As midday approaches, the pottage is served again, the same pot kept simmering by the fire, perhaps with a new addition of a few precious dried herbs for variety. With it comes a piece of dark bread, dense and hard compared to your modern bread. It's made from rye rather than white flour, which was too expensive for peasant families. The bread was likely baked weeks ago and has been carefully rationed since. It's slightly moldy on one edge, but no one seems concerned. Agnes simply scrapes off the worst of it before serving. After the meal, Thomas announces it's time to check the rabbit snares he set yesterday. Come with me, he invites you. If we're fortunate, we'll have meat tonight. Once again, you face the brutal cold, this time heading toward the edge of the village where the forest begins. The snow is deeper here, seeping into your leather shoes and soaking the cloth wrapped around your feet. Each step becomes more uncomfortable as the icy moisture penetrates to your skin. You find yourself longing for waterproof boots, something medieval technology cannot provide. Walk in my footsteps, Thomas advises as he breaks trail through the deeper snow. Save your strength. Winter takes enough without wasting effort. His words remind you of another reality of medieval winter, the careful conservation of energy. There are no extra calories to spare, no abundant food supply to replace energy expended in unnecessary exertion. Every movement, every task must be judged for its necessity and efficiency. The snare line yields 2 rabbits, a success that brings a rare smile to Thomas's weathered face. Good fortune, he says, quickly dispatching the creatures and tucking them into his cloak. Many nights we have no meat at all. On the return journey, Thomas points out various plants and trees, identifying those that can provide emergency food or medicine in winter. The inner bark of that tree can be ground for flour if stores run too low, he explains, pointing to a birch. Those red berries stay through winter, bitter, but they'll keep you alive. The needles of that pine make a tea that fights winter cough. This knowledge impresses you, a vast compendium of survival information passed down through generations. In your time, such knowledge is a hobby for outdoor enthusiasts. Here, it's the difference between life and death. By the time you return to the house, the short winter day is already waning. The temperature drops noticeably as the sun lowers, and you realize the night will be significantly colder than the day. Inside, Agnes has been preparing for evening, gathering extra rushes around the sleeping area for insulation, ensuring the fire is well stocked with the day's wood collection, and hanging damp clothes near the heat to dry. The family gathers around the fire as darkness falls. There are no electric lights, no television or internet to provide entertainment. Instead, Thomas begins to tell a story, a legend about saints and local heroes. The children listen intently, and you realize this oral tradition is both entertainment and education. Through these stories, children learn history, morality, and practical knowledge. As the story concludes, Agnes serves the evening meal, the ever-present pottage, now enriched with pieces of the day's rabbit. The meat is a luxury, providing precious fat and protein to help the family withstand the cold. Every part of the rabbits has been used, the meat for food, the fur to be processed for lining gloves or hoods, even the bones to be saved for broth. After eating, the family doesn't linger awake as you might in your electrically lit modern home. With darkness comes bedtime, regardless of the hour. The fire is banked to last through the night, not allowed to go out completely, which would mean the difficult task of starting a new fire in the morning, but reduced to conserve wood while still providing minimal warmth. The sleeping arrangement is communal, everyone on the same raised platform covered with straw and blankets. Body heat is the primary source of warmth through the night. The youngest child, still coughing, is placed in the middle where it's warmest. The grandmother sleeps closest to the fire, her aging body more vulnerable to the cold. As you settle down for your first night in medieval winter, you reflect on all you've experienced in just one day. The constant battle against cold, the careful management of limited resources, the physical hardship of even simple tasks, and the immense knowledge required just to survive. The temperature continues to drop outside, perhaps falling to near 0 Fahrenheit, 18 Celsius, by the deepest part of night. Inside, the temperature hovers just above freezing in the sleeping area, warmer near the banked fire but progressively colder toward the walls and corners. As you drift toward sleep, lulled by the soft breathing of the family around you and the occasional pop from the fire, you understand why modern humans would struggle to survive even a single day in medieval winter. It's not just the physical hardship, though that's considerable, but the mental adjustment to a world without the conveniences and safeties you take for granted. Yet the family around you doesn't see their life as tragic or unnecessarily difficult. This is simply life as they know it, with its hardships and small joys, its constant work and moments of rest. They've adapted to this reality with remarkable resilience and ingenuity, creating a life that, while challenging to modern sensibilities, has its own rhythm and meaning. The last thing you notice before sleep claims you's the sound of the wind picking up outside, whistling through the village and finding every crack in the humble house. Tomorrow, you think, will likely bring new challenges, perhaps a winter storm, or the worsening of the child's cough, or some other difficulty you cannot yet imagine. But for now, surrounded by the sleeping family, you're as safe and warm as it's possible to be in a medieval winter night. And as you finally drift off, you can't help but wonder how many more days you could endure in this harsh reality before the comforts of your modern life began to seem like an impossible dream. Perhaps that's the most sobering realization of all. What feels to you like an unbearable hardship was simply everyday life for countless generations of your ancestors. Morning arrives with reluctance, the weak winter sun barely penetrating the gloom of the small house. You awaken to the sound of the youngest child's cough, which has worsened overnight. The harsh, rattling sound sends a chill through you that has nothing to do with the temperature. In this era, before antibiotics, a winter cough can be a death sentence, especially for the young and old. Agnes is already awake, her face lined with worry as she tends to her daughter. She places a hand on the child's forehead and exchanges a meaningful glance with Thomas. "The fever has returned," she says quietly, "stronger than before." Thomas nods grimly and reaches for his cloak. "I'll fetch Clara," he says, naming the village wise woman who serves as healer, midwife, and counselor all in one. There are no doctors here, no hospitals or clinics to turn to in times of illness. The village relies on folk medicine, herbs, poultices, and remedies passed down through generations, bolstered by prayer and sometimes superstition. While Thomas is gone, Agnes busies herself preparing a remedy of her own. From dried bundles hanging from the rafters, she selects herbs that you recognize as thyme and sage. She crushes these in a small wooden mortar, adds a splash of precious honey, and mixes it with heated water from the ever-present pot by the fire. For her chest, Agnes explains as she helps the feverish child drink the mixture. It loosens the humors that cause the cough. Her explanation reflects the medieval understanding of illness, that diseases are caused by imbalances in the body's humors or fluids, rather than by germs or viruses, as you know. The older children are instructed to stay away from their sick sister, an intuitive form of quarantine that predates any formal understanding of contagion. The bad air might take you too, Agnes warns them, referring to the medieval belief that disease travels through foul-smelling air, or miasma. Thomas returns with Clara, an elderly woman with keen eyes and hands gnarled from decades of work. She carries a small leather satchel containing her healing supplies. After examining the child, feeling her pulse, and looking at her tongue, Clara nods knowingly. "A winter fever," she pronounces. The cold has settled in her chest. From her satchel, she produces small cloth packets of herbs, some dried berries, and a small jar of dark, sticky substance. "Mustard seed and bear fat for a chest poultice," she instructs Agnes. "Elderberry syrup 3 times daily. Keep her warm, but not too hot, and rub her chest and back with this salve when the coughing is worst." Clara's remedies, you realize, aren't entirely without merit. Elderberry does have antiviral properties, and mustard can indeed help with chest congestion, but without antibiotics to treat what is likely pneumonia, the child's recovery will depend largely on her own strength and perhaps a measure of luck. As Clara leaves, she pauses at the door. "Watch for the blackening of the fingernails or blueness of the lips," she warns quietly. "If those appear, send for me immediately, day or night." These ominous signs, you understand, would indicate that the illness has progressed to a critical stage, the child's body not getting enough oxygen due to the infection in her lungs. In your time, this would mean a rush to the emergency room and likely hospitalization. Here, it means intensified prayers and perhaps preparing for the worst. The sick child changes the day's rhythm entirely. Agnes remains indoors to tend to her daughter, while Thomas must now handle all the outdoor tasks himself. He turns to you and the older children for help. "We still need water and wood," he says simply. "Life doesn't stop for illness." And he's right. The stark reality of medieval winter is that basic survival tasks cannot be postponed, even for sickness. The fire must be maintained, animals fed, water collected, and food prepared. There are no sick days, no calling into work, no delivery services to bring supplies. You join Thomas in the bitter cold outside, this time heading toward the frozen stream that provides the village's water. Other villagers are already there, breaking through the ice to fill wooden buckets. You notice some are using axes to chop through thicker ice, while others have maintained holes that require less effort to reopen each day. Take care on the path, Thomas warns you. The ice forms quickly where water spills. The slippery trail to and from the water source has clearly caused injuries before, perhaps broken bones or worse. Such injuries in winter could be particularly devastating, leaving a person unable to work and thus vulnerable to starvation or freezing. There are no crutches readily available, no pain medications beyond alcohol and herbal remedies, no physical therapy to help recovery. Carrying water proves to be one of the most physically demanding tasks you've encountered. The filled wooden bucket is heavy, the path treacherous, and the cold makes your fingers stiff and unresponsive. Water sloshes over the rim, immediately freezing on your already inadequate footwear, By the time you return to the house, your feet are numb with cold, and you understand why frostbite and chilblains were common winter ailments in medieval times. Inside, Agnes has prepared a poultice as Clara instructed. The pungent smell of mustard fills the small house as she applies the warm mixture to the child's chest and back, then wraps her in woolen cloths to keep the poultice in place. The young girl whimpers, but doesn't resist, a sign of how poorly she feels. Will she recover? You ask Agnes, quietly when the child has drifted into a fitful sleep. Agnes's face is unreadable for a moment. Then she sighs. If God wills it. We've lost 2 others to winter fever in years past, our first and our 4th. She crosses herself. But many children survive, especially the strong ones. Her matter-of-fact acceptance of the possibility of her child's death strikes you as both heartbreaking and necessary. In a world where childhood mortality might reach 50% before the age of 5, parents cannot afford to fall apart at every illness. They pray, they treat, they hope, but they also prepare themselves for loss. The day wears on, each hour marked by the child's coughing fits. Between these episodes, you help with indoor tasks, mending clothing, processing the rabbit fur from yesterday's catch, and assisting with food preparation. Every item in the medieval household, you notice, is used until it is completely worn out, then repurposed for something else. Nothing is wasted. By midday, news of the child's illness has spread through the village. Neighbors stop by briefly, keeping a respectful distance but offering what help they can. A bundle of herbs here, a bit of honey there, promises of prayers. This communal response to crisis reveals one of medieval society's strengths, the tight social bonds that help individuals survive in harsh conditions. One visitor brings news that turns the day even darker. The miller's youngest died in the night, an older woman informs Agnes in hushed tones. The winter fever took him quickly. They're preparing the burial for tomorrow, ground permitting. Ground permitting, the phrase catches your attention, and you soon understand its meaning. In the depths of winter, the ground freezes solid, making grave digging nearly impossible. Bodies might need to be stored until a thaw allows burial, or in some cases, graves were dug with great difficulty using fire to thaw the soil bit by bit, a time and resource-intensive process when both were precious. The news of the child's death casts a pall over the household. Agnes redoubles her efforts with her own sick daughter, while Thomas disappears briefly to pay his respects to the miller's family. Death, you realize, is a constant companion in medieval winter. Not a shocking anomaly, but an expected visitor whose arrival is mourned, but not necessarily surprising. When Thomas returns, he brings both news and supplies. The Lord Steward has announced the winter distribution, he tells Agnes. Each household is to receive a measure of grain from the manor stores. It's to be collected tomorrow. This announcement brings visible relief to Agnes's face. Thanks be to God and the Lord's charity, she says. Our own stores are lower than I'd hoped for this early in winter. The winter distribution represents an important economic safety net in medieval society. The local lord, while extracting labor and crops from his peasants throughout the year, also maintained a responsibility to ensure they didn't starve during winter. This wasn't pure altruism. Dead peasants couldn't work the fields in spring, but it did provide critical support during the leanest months. The steward also warns of worse weather coming, Thomas adds. The bailiff saw weather signs, birds flying low, thickening ice on the pond, and a ring around the moon last night. These natural indicators, you realize, were the medieval equivalent of a weather forecast. Observations passed down through generations that helped people prepare for changing conditions. Without meteorological instruments or scientific understanding, medieval people relied on these signs to predict what might be coming. We should prepare, Agnes says decisively, already mentally cataloging tasks. More wood must be gathered before the snow comes. And we'll need to check the roof thatch for weak spots. The news of approaching storms creates a subtle shift in the household energy. Even with a sick child, preparations cannot wait. The older children are given specific tasks, checking for drafts around doors and windows, gathering extra rushes for the floor, bringing preserved food stores from the small external storage area into the house where they won't be buried by snow. You help Thomas with the critical task of gathering additional firewood. This time, you venture deeper into the woodland at the village edge, where Thomas has permission to collect deadfall, branches and trees that have fallen naturally. Cutting living trees would be forbidden without specific approval from the Lord's bailiff, punishable by fines or worse. In the harshest winters, Thomas explains as you work, the Lord sometimes grants extra wood rights, but only if many are at risk of freezing. One family alone would not warrant such charity. The approaching storm adds urgency to your work. You gather more than usual, creating bundles tied with twisted reed that can be carried back to the house. Your hands, already chapped and sore from yesterday's cold exposure, develop painful cracks that bleed slightly. Without gloves, constant exposure to cold, wet wood, and freezing air is taking a toll on your skin. Thomas notices your discomfort and offers a remedy. Bear fat mixed with beeswax, he suggests. Agnes will have some. It helps the hands in winter work. By the time you return to the house, laden with wood, the short winter day is already fading toward evening. Inside, the atmosphere is tense. The sick child's fever has risen further, and her breathing has become more labored. Agnes moves between tending her daughter and preparing the evening meal, her face drawn with worry and fatigue. The grandmother, who has been quietly helpful throughout the day, takes over food preparation to free Agnes for nursing duties. From the family's dwindling stores, she retrieves a precious onion and adds it to the ever-present pottage pot. The sharp smell fills the house, temporarily overwhelming even the mustard poultice's pungent aroma. Onions are good for the chest, she explains, noticing your interest. They thin the blood and ease breathing. As darkness gathers outside, the family's preparations for night take on added significance with illness in the house and a storm approaching. Extra wood is stacked within easy reach of the fire. Water buckets are filled to avoid morning trips to the frozen stream if snow makes the path impassable. Food is prepared and positioned so that Agnes can reach it during the night without leaving her sick child's side. The fire is built up stronger than the previous night, a necessary expenditure of extra wood given both the child's illness and the coming weather. The additional heat makes the house almost comfortable by medieval standards, perhaps 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 Celsius, near the fire, though still much cooler by the walls. As the family settles in for the night, Thomas takes a moment to check the exterior of the house one final time. He returns looking grim. The clouds are right for heavy snow, he reports, and the air smells of it coming. This prompts a rare moment of storytelling, despite the worry over the sick child. The grandmother, settling near the fire, begins to recount a tale of the great frost, some decades past, a winter so severe that the stream froze solid to the bottom. Wolves came into the village desperate with hunger, and several families survived by sheltering together in the church, burning pews for warmth when other wood ran out. 3 of the old village died that winter, she recounts, and Hans, the charcoal burner, lost both feet to the frost, but most survived by sharing what little we had. Her story serves as both entertainment and instruction, a reminder of how bad things could get and how the community had survived through mutual aid. The children listen wide-eyed, temporarily distracted from their sister's illness and the threatening weather outside. The night deepens, and sleeping arrangements are adjusted for the sick child. Agnes will remain awake beside her daughter, watching for any worsening of symptoms. Thomas positions himself near the fire, responsible for maintaining it through the night. The other children and grandmother arrange themselves on the sleeping platform, with you finding space at one edge. Despite the worry hanging over the household, exhaustion from the day's physical labor soon pulls most into sleep. The last thing you notice before drifting off is the sound of the wind picking up outside, carrying the first soft patterings of snow against the shuttered window. You awaken some hours later to near total darkness and the sound of urgent activity. The fire has been built up, casting long shadows across the house. Agnes is bent over her daughter, whose breathing has become a frighteningly audible wheeze. Thomas is pulling on his cloak. "I'm fetching Clara," he says, voice tight with concern. The fever burns too hot, and her lips have the blue tinge. This is the emergency Clara warned of. The child's condition has deteriorated to a critical point. Thomas doesn't wait for a response, but disappears into the night, where you can now hear the full force of the storm, howling wind and the distinctive muffled quality that indicates heavy snowfall. Agnes works frantically, applying cool cloths to the child's forehead while encouraging her to drink small sips of water mixed with herbs. The grandmother has awakened and joins her, the two women moving with the practiced coordination of those who have faced such crises before. Time passes with excruciating slowness. The other children have awakened, but remain huddled together on the sleeping platform, their faces reflecting fear and confusion. The youngest boy begins to cry softly, quickly shushed by his older sister who holds him close. When the door finally opens, snow swirls in with Thomas and Clara, both covered in a thick layer of white. Clara doesn't waste time with greetings, but moves directly to the sick child, her experienced hands checking pulse, temperature, and breathing. "The lung fever has deepened," she pronounces gravely. From her bag, she produces a small stoppered bottle containing a dark liquid. This is stronger medicine, foxglove and poppy with honey. It may ease her breathing, but will make her sleep deeply. Sometimes the sleep allows the body to heal itself. You recognize these ingredients with a jolt of medical knowledge from your time. Foxglove contains digitalis, used even in modern heart medications, and poppy is the source of opium, a powerful pain reliever. These are potent, potentially dangerous substances, being administered by folk wisdom rather than precise measurement. Clara measures a few drops onto a spoon and carefully administers it to the child, who swallows reflexively. "Now we wait," she says simply, settling by the fire. "The storm has closed the paths, so I will remain until morning." Outside, the storm has intensified to a full blizzard. Wind howls around the eaves of the small house, finding every crack and gap in the wattle and daub walls. Snow has begun to drift against the door. Thomas reports it's already knee-deep in places and still falling heavily. This, you realize, is another deadly aspect of medieval winter, isolation. In a severe storm, even traveling the short distance between houses in the same village becomes dangerous or impossible. Help might be unavailable precisely when it's most needed. People could be trapped for days, and if food or firewood ran low during that time, the consequences could be fatal. The remainder of the night passes in tense vigilance. The child's breathing gradually becomes less labored as Clara's medicine takes effect, but her fever remains dangerously high. Agnes and Clara take turns applying cool cloths and monitoring her condition, while Thomas maintains the fire at a steady blaze despite the precious wood being consumed. Dawn arrives with eerie quietness. The storm has passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape. Thomas forces the door open against accumulated snow and steps out to assess the situation. He returns with mixed news. The snow is deep, Past my knees in most places, higher where it's drifted. The path to the manor is blocked entirely, but the sky is clear now, and men are already working to clear the main village way. Clara examines the child again in the growing daylight. The fever has lessened slightly, she announces, bringing visible relief to Agnes's face. But she is not yet safe. Continue with the remedies, and I will return by midday if the paths allow. As Clara prepares to leave, she pauses to offer a broader warning. The miller's boy was not the only one. 3 other households have the lung fever among them. Keep the other children away from the sick where possible. She glances meaningfully at the older children. And watch for the first signs: the throat tickle, the warming of the forehead, the cough that stays. Her warning underscores another reality of medieval winter. Illness spreads quickly through communities with no understanding of germ theory, limited hygiene, and close quarters necessitated by cold. What began as one sick child could become a village-wide crisis within days. After Clara departs, the household settles into a new rhythm dictated by the sick child's needs and the snow outside. The usual daily tasks, gathering wood, fetching water, tending animals, are complicated by deep snow and bitter cold, but they cannot be neglected. Thomas and the older boy begin the laborious process of clearing paths to the necessary outbuildings and joining the village effort to open critical routes. Without shovels, as you know them, just wooden implements with metal edges at best, this is exhausting work. Snow is piled into high banks alongside the cleared paths, creating a maze-like quality to the village. Inside, Agnes divides her attention between the sick child and essential household duties. The crisis has put additional strain on their winter supplies. More wood burned for extra warmth, more water needed for cooling cloths and medicines, more herbs used for remedies. Each resource used now represents a potential shortage later in winter. By midday, the child's fever has broken, bringing cautious optimism to the household. She remains weak and still coughs painfully, but the blue tinge has left her lips, and she is able to take small amounts of broth. A good sign. When Clara returns as promised, she nods with approval at the child's improved condition. She may recover if the fever doesn't return, she says, but she will be weak for many days. Keep her warm, fed with broth, and give the elderberry syrup until the cough leaves entirely. As Clara prepares to visit other sick households, she pauses to share news gathered during her morning rounds. The manor distribution has been delayed until paths are fully cleared, she informs Thomas. And there's worse. Word has come from the next village that their grain store was found rotted after the autumn rains. Many there are already hungry, and some have begun to travel here, seeking aid. This news brings a shadow of concern to Thomas's face. The arrival of hungry outsiders could strain the village's limited winter resources, potentially creating shortages that would otherwise have been avoided. Yet Christian charity and basic humanity demand helping those in dire need, a difficult balance in a time of scarcity. The Lord Steward has called a village meeting for tomorrow, Clara adds. All households are to attend. I expect they will discuss how to manage if more come seeking help. As Clara leaves, the reality of medieval winter emerges in sharper focus. It's not just the physical challenges of cold, illness, and scarcity that threaten survival, but the complex social decisions that must be made when resources are limited and margins for error are small. The day progresses with the family grateful for their daughter's improvement, but sobered by news of hardship elsewhere. The precious routine of winter survival continues, mending clothing, preserving food, maintaining the fire, and now the added task of nursing a recovering child. As evening approaches, bringing another long winter night, you reflect on the second day of your medieval winter experience. The fragility of life here is stark, with illness, storms, and hunger constantly threatening. Yet there's also remarkable resilience in the knowledge of healers like Clara, in the community's response to crisis, and in the ordinary courage of families who face these challenges year after year. The medieval winter is far from over, but the family has survived another day of its trials. As darkness falls, Thomas banks the fire carefully, ensuring it will last through most of the night while conserving precious wood. The sick child is sleeping peacefully now, her breathing easier than before. In the dim firelight, Agnes looks at her daughter's face and permits herself a small smile of relief. "One day at a time," she murmurs, echoing what must be the unofficial motto of medieval winter survival. We take it one day at a time. Morning light filters through the smoke hole and the tiny gaps in the shuttered windows, revealing a transformed world outside. The snow has stopped, leaving behind a pristine blanket that covers the village and surrounding fields in white. Were it not for the smoke rising from each house, the landscape might appear completely deserted. Inside, the mood is cautiously optimistic. The sick child has passed a peaceful night, her fever reduced and her breathing less labored. She's still weak, dangerously so, but Agnes allows herself a moment of hope as she checks her daughter's forehead in the early light. She's cooler, she whispers to Thomas, who has already risen to stoke the fire. The worst may have passed. Thomas nods, relief visible in the softening of his weathered face. God be thanked, he says simply, then returns to the practical matters that cannot wait, even for illness. The village meeting is at midday. We must clear paths and check the animals before then. The village meeting has added importance today, given the news Clara brought yesterday about hungry refugees from the neighboring village. Winter food security is a constant concern, but the potential arrival of desperate outsiders adds complexity to an already precarious situation. Breakfast is the familiar pottage, though Agnes has made it thinner than usual, more like a broth, for the recovering child who manages a few spoonfuls before falling back into an exhausted sleep. You notice the portions for everyone else are slightly smaller as well, an almost imperceptible adjustment that speaks to Agnes's careful management of their dwindling supplies. After eating, you join Thomas and the older boy in the grueling work of path clearing. The snow is knee-deep in most places, and without proper shovels, the task involves scraping and pushing the snow aside with flat wooden implements, essentially paddles with metal-reinforced edges. The work is physically demanding, causing sweat to form under your woolen layers despite the bitter cold. Sweat is dangerous in winter, Thomas warns, noticing your exertion. It soaks your clothes, then freezes when you rest. Many have died that way. He demonstrates how to pace the work, taking frequent short breaks to prevent overheating. This careful management of body temperature is yet another survival skill that medieval people have mastered through necessity. As you work your way toward the village center, you see other families engaged in similar labor. Men and older boys clear the primary paths, while women and younger children create narrower walkways to essential outbuildings like privies and animal shelters. The elderly contribute by breaking ice for water access or watching young children, every age group playing a vital role in the community's winter survival. The pathways gradually form a network through the snow-covered village, connecting households to essential resources and to each other. You realize this isn't just about practical access, it's about maintaining the social fabric that's crucial for survival. Isolation in winter could mean death if a family faces a crisis alone. By midday, sufficient paths have been cleared for the village meeting to proceed. Thomas, as the male head of household, will attend while Agnes remains with the sick child. This gendered division of responsibilities is typical of medieval society. though you've observed that behind closed doors, decision-making seems more equally shared between husband and wife. Listen carefully. Agnes instructs Thomas before he leaves. If they're distributing grain today despite the newcomers, we should take our share immediately. The flour barrel is emptier than I'd like for January. Her comment reminds you that the winter is still young. January means months of cold remain before spring brings relief. Food stores calculated to last through winter are already showing signs of strain, a worrying development this early in the season. Thomas nods in acknowledgement of his wife's concern. I'll speak for our needs, he assures her. The Lord knows which families have served him well in harvest times. This reference to the social contract between peasants and their lord highlights how past actions influence present support. Those who worked diligently during abundant times could reasonably expect more assistance during scarcity. As Thomas departs for the meeting, bundled against the cold in his best, though still patched and worn, cloak, Agnes turns her attention to indoor tasks that have been neglected during the crisis of the child's illness. The older girl is set to spinning wool, a critical winter activity that produces thread for future weaving. The boy, having helped with path clearing, now assists his grandmother in sorting through stored onions and turnips, removing any showing signs of rot before they can spoil others. You're invited to help Agnes with mending, repairing small holes in garments before they become larger problems. Using a bone needle and thread spun from local flax, you learn how even the simplest clothing represents substantial investment of time and resources. A single shirt might represent weeks of processing fiber, spinning, weaving, and sewing. Nothing is discarded until it's been patched repeatedly and finally repurposed into smaller items or rags. In winter, we prepare for spring, Agnes explains, as she guides your inexperienced hands in the proper way to create a sturdy patch. What we repair now will be needed when fieldwork begins again. There's no time for mending then. This constant eye toward the future, preparing in each season for the needs of the next, is a fundamental aspect of medieval life. Winter is not merely about surviving until spring, it's about laying groundwork for the entire year to come. The sick child wakes briefly, accepting another small portion of broth with herbs before drifting back to sleep. Her breathing remains easier than yesterday, but her weakness is profound. Agnes watches her with the vigilant eye of a mother who has lost children before and understands the precarious nature of recovery. Stories help healing, the grandmother suggests. They take the mind away from pain and bring the spirit back to the body. With that, she begins telling a tale to the sleeping child, a story about saints and miracles appropriate for the winter season. The other children pause in their work to listen, drawn to the familiar rhythm of storytelling that forms such an important part of winter entertainment. In the absence of books, television, or internet, oral storytelling serves multiple purposes in medieval society. It entertains during the long, dark hours, transmits cultural knowledge and moral lessons, preserves history, and creates bonds between generations. The grandmother's story, though ostensibly for the sick child, clearly benefits everyone in the household by providing a mental escape from the harsh realities outside. The tale is interrupted by Thomas's return from the village meeting. His expression is somber as he stamps snow from his feet and moves toward the fire to warm himself. The family waits expectantly for news. The steward confirms that 20 people have already arrived from Oakwood Village, he reports, naming the neighboring settlement where grain stores were found rotted. More may follow. They're being housed in the church and old barn for now. Agnes's face shows concern, but she doesn't interrupt as Thomas continues. The Lord has agreed to distribute grain as planned, but in smaller portions to stretch supplies. Our share will be reduced by a third from what was promised. He glances at the nearly empty flour barrel. It will help, but we must be even more careful now. This news lands heavily in the small house. A third less grain means a third less bread, a critical component of their winter diet. The family will need to rely more heavily on preserved vegetables and whatever meat they can obtain through hunting or trapping. There's more, Thomas adds after warming his hands. The refugees report wolf packs following them from the forest near Oakwood. Animals are hungry this winter too, and when game is scarce, they grow bold. This news brings a different kind of fear. Wolves rarely attack humans except in dire circumstances, but extreme hunger can change their behavior. Livestock, precious animals that provide milk, eggs, wool, and eventually meat, become tempting targets for predators. We must reinforce the goat shed tonight, Thomas decides. Extra branches woven through the walls should strengthen it. The afternoon passes with this new task taking priority. You help Thomas and his son gather fallen branches from the edge of the woodland, carefully staying within sight of the village. The snow makes this work easier in some ways. Fallen wood previously hidden by undergrowth is now visible, but the cold makes every movement more difficult as fingers grow stiff despite woolen hand coverings. While working, Thomas explains how predator behavior changes in winter. Wolves hunt in packs, taking down the weak or isolated, he says. In ordinary times, they stay far from humans, but in the harshest winters, when their hunger grows desperate, they've been known to enter villages by night. He describes the defenses that generations of villagers have developed, keeping animals close to human dwellings, maintaining night watches during particularly hard times, using fire and noise to frighten predators away. These strategies represent another layer of winter survival knowledge passed down through experience, often learned at great cost. By late afternoon, the animal shelter has been reinforced with additional woven branches, creating a stronger barrier against potential predators. The family's 2 goats and few chickens represent a significant portion of their wealth and security. Losing them would be catastrophic, especially midwinter when replacements are impossible to obtain. As darkness approaches much too early, winter days in northern Europe, offering perhaps 8 hours of usable light, the family gathers again around the central fire. The sick child has awakened and seems marginally stronger, able to sit propped against her mother while taking small amounts of food. The evening meal reflects the news from the village meeting. The pottage is stretched with extra water, making it thinner than usual, and the bread portions are noticeably smaller. No one comments on this reduction. Adjusting to fluctuating food availability is simply part of winter life. After eating, Thomas surprises the household by producing a small pouch from within his tunic. From Cedric the carpenter, he explains, in exchange for helping him clear snow from his workshop roof. From the pouch, he extracts a handful of hazelnuts, a rare winter treat that brings smiles to the children's faces. Just a few each, Agnes cautions as Thomas distributes them, ensuring the sick child receives her share. They'll strengthen the blood. This small luxury, nuts that might have been gathered in autumn and stored for winter, represents the intricate system of exchanges that help a village survive. Direct barter of goods and services creates resilience, allowing resources to flow where needed most without requiring currency, which is scarce among peasants. As the evening progresses, the family engages in what you recognize as typical winter activities. Agnes and her daughter return to spinning, turning cleaned wool into thread that will eventually become clothing or be sold for other necessities. Thomas and his son examine and repair small tools by firelight, tasks that cannot be done during busy farming seasons. The grandmother teaches the youngest boy to carve simple shapes from a piece of softwood, developing skills he'll need as he grows. These indoor activities aren't merely ways to pass time. They're essential productive work that maintains the household economy. Winter, despite its challenges, provides the only extended period when such tasks can receive focused attention. A well-managed medieval household uses these dark months to prepare for the year ahead, producing and repairing the tools, clothing, and household items needed for survival. Conversation flows around these activities, updates on neighbors gathered during the day, speculation about how long the refugees might stay, quiet concerns about food supplies, and plans for tomorrow's tasks. The rhythm of work and talk creates a comforting atmosphere despite the underlying anxiety about the reduced grain allowance and potential wolf threat. This evening routine is interrupted by a knock at the door, unusual in winter when families typically remain in their own homes after dark. Thomas opens it cautiously to find a young man from the village, his cloak covered with fresh snow. A message from the steward, he announces. All men are called to night watch duty. Wolves have been sighted at the village edge. Thomas nods grimly and reaches for his heaviest cloak. "I'll come now," he says, then turns to his family. "Bar the door after me. I'll knock 3 times when I return." This development adds a new layer of tension to the night. After Thomas departs for his watch duty, Agnes secures the door with its simple wooden bar and adds extra fuel to the fire. "The light and smoke will keep predators away," she explains, though you suspect the action is as much for reassurance as practical protection. "Will father be safe?" the youngest boy asks, fear evident in his voice. "Men together are stronger than any wolf pack," the grandmother assures him. "They'll guard each other as well as the village." To distract the children from worry, she begins another story, this one about St. Nicholas and winter miracles. The tale is clearly familiar to the family, who join in at certain points, reciting favorite passages together. This collaborative storytelling creates a sense of stability and continuity, particularly important during times of stress. The sick child listens intently for a while before exhaustion overtakes her again. Agnes helps her to the sleeping area, arranging blankets to keep her warm while still allowing easy breathing. The improvement in her condition continues to be slow but steady, a hopeful sign in a season where illness so often takes a fatal turn. As the evening grows later, preparations for sleep begin despite Thomas's absence. The fire is banked to last through the night, water is brought inside so it won't freeze solid, and sleeping areas are arranged with the most vulnerable family members in the warmest positions. You find yourself assigned a sleeping spot between the older children, the shared body warmth creating a cocoon of relative comfort despite the dropping temperature. As the household settles into silence, broken only by the occasional pop from the fire, you reflect on how this third day of medieval winter has revealed new dimensions of survival. The social structures that initially seemed rigid have shown their practical foundations: the lord's responsibility to his peasants, the village's collective approach to external threats, the family's internal division of labor. These aren't arbitrary systems, but adaptive strategies developed over generations to maximize survival chances in harsh conditions. Similarly, the careful management of resources, stretching food when necessary, exchanging goods and services within the community, repairing rather than replacing items, represents sophisticated survival knowledge rather than simple poverty. The medieval household operates within tight constraints, but does so with remarkable effectiveness. Outside, you can occasionally hear the distant sounds of the night watch, men calling to each other across the village, maintaining contact as they patrol for wolves or other threats. This communal defense represents yet another layer of survival strategy, with the village functioning as a single organism when faced with danger. Sleep comes more easily than you expected, your body now somewhat accustomed to the physical demands of medieval life and the ambient cold of the house. The last thing you register before drifting off is the grandmother's voice, softly singing what seems to be a protective charm or prayer over the sleeping children. Hours later, you're awakened by 3 distinct knocks at the door, Thomas returning from his watch duty. Agnes rises quickly to admit him, and he enters bringing a blast of cold air and the scent of wood smoke from watch fires. Wolves came to the edge of William's field, he reports quietly, warming his hands at the banked fire. 4 or 5, from what we could count. They watched but didn't approach closer. The men kept fires burning and made noise to frighten them away. Did they take any animals? Agnes asks with practical concern. None from the village, Thomas answers. Though they'd clearly fed on something, their muzzles were bloody. Perhaps deer or livestock from an outlying farm. The implications of this go unspoken. Wolves that have successfully hunted are less desperate, at least temporarily, reducing the immediate danger to the village. Thomas checks on his sleeping children, lingering longest beside his sick daughter. Satisfied that all is well, he finally allows himself to rest, joining the family on the sleeping platform. As the house settles back into silence, the last embers of the fire casting faint shadows on the walls, you find yourself again drifting towards sleep. Medieval winter has revealed itself as a complex challenge requiring physical endurance, practical knowledge, social cooperation, and mental resilience. Each day brings new threats, illness, scarcity, predators, but also demonstrates the determined adaptability that allows humans to survive in seemingly impossible conditions. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, but for now, the family rests in the brief security of their humble dwelling, having navigated another day of medieval winter's trials. Dawn breaks with painful slowness, the winter sun reluctant to climb above the horizon. The family stirs to life in the dim light, each member moving through well-established routines, despite the lingering exhaustion from yesterday's challenges. Thomas, having spent much of the night on watch duty, rises stiffly, his joints protesting after hours in the cold. The wolves withdrew before dawn, he reports while rekindling the fire from its carefully preserved embers. William thinks they've moved south, following deer tracks. This news brings visible relief to Agnes's face as she checks on a recovering daughter. The child's fever has not returned during the night, a promising sign that the worst of the illness has passed. She's still weak, but her eyes are clearer, and she accepts a small piece of bread softened in broth without resistance. We give thanks to God and Saint Blaise for her healing, the grandmother murmurs, making the sign of the cross. Saint Blaise, the patron saint of throat ailments, has been the focus of the family's prayers throughout the crisis, and they attribute the child's improvement as much to divine intervention as to Clara's remedies. This spiritual dimension of medieval life becomes more apparent as the day begins. Before the family disperses to their various tasks, Thomas leads them in morning prayers, reciting Latin phrases taught by the village priest and passed down through generations. Few peasants understand the actual words, but the ritual itself provides structure and comfort, connecting the humble household to the greater Christian community and offering hope amid winter's hardships. You notice a small wooden cross hanging near the door and a crude figure of Mary in a niche by the fire, simple expressions of faith that pervade everyday life. Religion is not a separate activity, but an integrated framework that helps explain, endure, and find meaning in suffering. When earthly remedies fail, spiritual solace remains. The day ahead holds new challenges. The village grain distribution is scheduled for midday, requiring Thomas to be present with sacks to collect their allotment. Additionally, the steward has assigned him to a hunting party, an unusual winter activity permitted only in times of need, as the Lord normally reserves hunting rights for himself and his guests. The refugees must be fed, Thomas explains as he prepares for the day, and our own supplies grow thin. The steward has granted permission to take deer and smaller game from the Northwoods, but only for today. This temporary suspension of normal hunting restrictions represents another layer of the medieval social contract. The Lord's strict control of woodland resources, particularly game animals, is a fundamental aspect of his power, but pragmatic concerns for survival can override even these deeply entrenched rules during crisis. Agnes prepares for Thomas's participation in the hunt by gathering what meager provisions she can spare, a small piece of bread and a wrapped bundle of turnips and dried herbs. To keep your strength, she tells him, tucking the food into his leather pouch. This seemingly simple act highlights another reality of medieval winter. No work, even essential hunting, can be undertaken without careful calculation of the energy required versus the food consumed in the process. With the sick child improving, Agnes plans to attend to neglected tasks, particularly laundering essential items that cannot wait until warmer weather. Washing clothes in winter presents its own set of challenges, requiring heating water over the fire, using precious soap made from animal fat and wood ash, and finding ways to dry garments in the cold, damp environment. As the family breaks their fast with the usual pottage, now noticeably thinner to stretch supplies, a knock at the door announces Clara's arrival. The healer has come to check on her patient and brings welcome news from beyond the household. The church is organizing food for the refugees. She informs them after examining the sick child and expressing satisfaction with her progress. Father Michael has opened the parish storehouse, and wealthier households have been asked to contribute. This parish storehouse, a small reserve of food maintained by the church for emergencies and to feed the poorest members of the community, represents another survival mechanism in medieval society. While inadequate for long-term crisis, it provides temporary relief that might prevent starvation in the most vulnerable households. The miller has offered to grind a portion of his personal grain store without taking the usual fee, Clara continues, and the baker will make bread for the refugees using the church's fuel. These acts of charity reflect both Christian values and practical community resilience, the recognition that collective survival sometimes requires individual sacrifice. The miller and baker, while protecting their own family's needs, understand that their specialized skills and resources come with social responsibilities. After Clara departs, the household divides to address the day's work. Thomas leaves for the hunting party, joining other men at the village center. Agnes begins the laborious process of winter laundering, heating water in the cooking pot and preparing a washing area near the fire. The older children are assigned to help with this task, while the grandmother tends to the sick child and keeps the youngest boy occupied with simple games and small chores. You're invited to join Agnes in the washing work, giving you insight into yet another aspect of medieval winter survival. The process is nothing like modern laundry routines. First, water must be hauled from the partially frozen stream and heated over the fire, a time and fuel-intensive task. Soap is used sparingly, reserved primarily for undergarments and baby clothes, with outer garments often simply aired or beaten with sticks to remove dust and vermin. In summer, we wash at the stream, Agnes explains as she demonstrates how to scrub linen undergarments against a ridged wooden board. But winter washing must be done indoors, though the steam makes everything damp. Still, some things cannot wait for spring, especially with sickness in the house. The wet garments are wrung out by hand, then hung on lines strung near the fire, creating a steamy, humid environment within the normally dry winter air of the house. This temporary humidity has both benefits and drawbacks, Agnes explains. It eases breathing for the sick child, but can cause dampness in bedding and food if continued too long. We must finish by nightfall and open the smoke hole wider to clear the damp, she instructs. Otherwise, the bread molds and the rushes rot. This careful balance between necessary activities and their potential consequences characterizes so much of medieval winter life. Each decision requires weighing immediate needs against long-term sustainability with little margin for error. Mid-morning brings an interruption as the older boy returns from a brief errand to a neighbor's house with surprising news. "Travelers have come," he announces breathlessly. "Merchants with a cart stuck at the crossing. Father has been called to help free it with the other men. Merchants traveling in winter is unusual enough to cause excitement. Most trading activities cease during the harshest months, with roads becoming impassable and travel dangers multiplying. Only the most valuable goods or urgent messages justify winter journeys, making any arrival a noteworthy event." "Did you see what they carried?" Agnes asks, her practical mind immediately considering what goods might be available for trade and what they might afford to barter. "Cloth, I think," the boy reports, "and small boxes. They wore fine furs and had 2 guards with them." This description indicates merchants of considerable means, likely carrying luxury goods between major towns and willing to risk winter travel due to the high profit margins. Their presence represents both opportunity and disruption for the village, potential access to rare items, but also additional mouths to feed if they become snowbound. The washing continues through the morning, with conversation focusing on what the merchants might bring and whether Thomas might successfully hunt game. Both topics reflect the central concerns of winter survival, securing food and obtaining essential supplies that cannot be produced within the household. By midday, you've gained a new appreciation for the physical demands of even simple tasks like laundry. Your arms ache from scrubbing, your back hurts from bending over the wash basin, and your hands are red and chapped from alternating exposure to hot water and cold air. Agnes seems untroubled by these discomforts, her body long accustomed to the work, though you notice she occasionally stretches her back when she thinks no one is watching. The arrival of Thomas breaks the washing routine. He comes to collect sacks for the grain distribution, bringing news of both the merchants and the hunting party. The cart is freed, he reports. They bring dyed cloth, spices, and metal needles from the southern towns. The steward has granted them shelter in the old barn with the refugees. More exciting is the news of the hunt. "We've taken 2 deer, he says with satisfaction. "Not large, but healthy. The Lord will take his portion, but the rest will be divided among all households, including those housing refugees." This success means fresh meat, a rarity in late winter when most families have already consumed their preserved supplies from autumn slaughtering. Thomas departs again with empty sacks, heading to the manor for the grain distribution. This system, whereby the Lord returns a portion of the harvest to the peasants who worked his fields, represents one of the fundamental economic relationships of medieval life. The Lord's larger storage facilities and ability to enforce rationing help manage resources through the winter, theoretically preventing the feast or famine cycle that might otherwise occur. The afternoon brings a burst of activity to the village. From your position near the door, where you've moved to help hang laundry on outdoor lines during a brief period of sunshine, you can observe the community in motion. Men return from the successful hunt carrying dressed deer portions wrapped in cloth. Women emerge from houses to exchange news and small bundles of resources, herbs from one household, a bit of precious salt from another, some dried berries from a third. Children run errands between houses, their breath visible in the cold air. This flurry of movement represents the village's economic system in action, a complex network of formal obligations and informal exchanges that redistributes resources according to need and availability. Unlike the market-based economy of your time, medieval village economics operates primarily through personal relationships, barter, and mutual aid, with relatively little currency changing hands among common people. Thomas returns with the family's grain allotment, noticeably smaller than expected, but still enough to mill into flour for bread over the coming weeks. He also brings news that the hunting party will go out again tomorrow, this time focusing on smaller game like rabbits and winter birds. The steward says we may use snares as well as bows, he explains, while showing Agnes the grain. Any household with men able to hunt or check traps should send them at dawn. The success of the deer hunt has created optimism throughout the village. Fresh meat provides not just nutrition, but psychological comfort, tangible proof that winter's scarcity can be overcome through collective action. The hunters are treated with particular respect today, their skill having directly contributed to the community's welfare. As the short winter day begins its early slide toward darkness, new sounds reach the house, unfamiliar voices speaking with different accents, the creak of cartwheels, and the nickering of horses unaccustomed to the village. The merchants are making rounds, visiting those households known to have items worth trading. To your surprise, they stop at Thomas and Agnes's door. Despite the family's obvious poverty by modern standards, they possess skills and items valued in the medieval economy. Agnes's fine spinning is recognized beyond the village, and Thomas's ability to carve wooden implements gives them trading leverage even in winter. The merchant who enters is dramatically different from the villagers. His clothing, while practical for winter, shows quality impossible for peasants to obtain. Wool dyed in rich colors, a fur-lined hood, and leather boots that reach his knees. He's accompanied by a servant carrying a small chest, and he greets the family with the confidence of someone accustomed to being welcomed. "Good day to this house," he says formally. "I've come seeking fine-spun thread and well-carved spoons. I'm told yours are worth my time." Agnes brings forward her best work. Thread so evenly spun, it looks machine-made to your modern eyes, despite being created with just a simple drop spindle and tremendous skill. Thomas produces several spoons carved from different woods, their handles decorated with simple but elegant designs. The merchant examines these offerings with a practiced eye, setting aside those that meet his standards. "These will sell well in the town markets," he comments. "What do you seek in exchange?" This begins a careful negotiation. Agnes first asks for news, information being a valuable commodity in isolated winter communities. The merchant obliges with reports from other villages and the nearest town, describing conditions on the roads, grain prices, and distant events that might eventually affect local life. After this exchange of information, Agnes names their most urgent needs: a steel needle to replace one that broke, a small amount of salt, and if possible, a remedy for lung ailments should their daughter's condition worsen again. The merchant sets values on both their goods and his, and the bartering proceeds with respectful intensity on both sides. You notice that no coins change hands. This is trade in its most direct form, with values determined by mutual agreement rather than fixed prices. The negotiation concludes with Agnes receiving her requested items, plus a small package of dried herbs the merchant claims are from lands beyond the Great Sea as a gesture of goodwill. In return, he takes all of Thomas's spoons and most of Agnes's finest thread. Both parties seem satisfied with the exchange, though you suspect the merchant has secured the better economic value. Still, the transaction has provided the family with items they urgently need and could not produce themselves, demonstrating how trade links even isolated communities to broader economic networks. As the merchant departs to visit other households, the family examines their new possessions with interest. The steel needle, slim, strong, and precisely pointed, represents technology beyond the village's production capabilities. The salt, while a small quantity, will help preserve any meat they obtain and improve the flavor of their increasingly monotonous diet. The exotic herbs are carefully stored for the child's potential future needs, their foreign origin giving them extra perceived potency. The excitement of the merchant's visit carries the family through the afternoon's work. Even routine tasks feel lighter with new supplies in the house and the promise of fresh meat from the hunting party. The previously sick child sits up for longer periods, wrapped in blankets near the fire, listening to her siblings' animated descriptions of the merchant's fine clothes and unusual accents. Evening approaches with another new development. Smoke from the manor house. Chimney intensifies, indicating the great hall's fireplace has been fully kindled. Soon after, a messenger arrives at the village center, announcing that the Lord himself has arrived from his winter residence in the town and will hold court tomorrow. This news creates a stir among the villagers. The Lord's presence brings both opportunity and anxiety. He might address disputes, grant special permissions, or impose new requirements, all of which could significantly impact winter survival. Each household must prepare to present themselves properly if called to the manor, regardless of winter conditions. "We must clean your good tunic," Agnes tells Thomas, adding this task to the already substantial workload. The good tunic in question is barely distinguishable from everyday clothing to your modern eyes, but its slightly finer weave and fewer patches mark it as appropriate for formal occasions. The evening meal features a welcome addition, a small portion of fresh venison allocated to each household from the day's hunt. The meat is quickly roasted over the fire, filling the house with a tantalizing aroma that draws even the recovering child to full alertness. Combined with the ubiquitous pottage and a slightly larger piece of bread than yesterday, thanks to the grain distribution, it makes for the most satisfying meal you've experienced in this medieval winter. The improved food and successful trading create a lighter atmosphere within the household. For the first time since your arrival, you observe something resembling leisure after the evening meal. Thomas produces a small pipe made from clay and enjoys a rare smoke of dried herbs, not tobacco, which wouldn't reach Europe for centuries, but local plants with mild relaxant properties. Agnes and her daughter work on simple embroidery by firelight, decorating the edge of a linen cloth with basic geometric patterns using threads unraveled from an old garment. The grandmother organizes a game for the younger children using hazelnuts and a crudely marked wooden board, teaching both counting skills and strategic thinking through play. Even in the depths of winter, amid scarcity and hardship, the human need for recreation asserts itself, finding expression through these simple activities. Your observation of this brief period of relaxation is interrupted by the sound of bells from the village church, not the regular pattern marking prayer times, but an urgent, irregular ringing that clearly signals emergency. Thomas immediately rises, reaching for his cloak and staff. "The alarm," he explains tersely. "All men to the village center." Agnes moves quickly to bar the door after his departure, then positions herself near the window, peering through a small gap in the shutters. The older boy, though technically still a child, stands ready with a heavy wooden tool that could serve as a weapon if needed. "What danger comes?" you ask, sensing the family's immediate shift to defensive readiness. "It could be many things," Agnes answers, her eyes not leaving the narrow view through the shutter. "Wolves again, perhaps, or more desperate refugees than the village can handle. Or," she hesitates, "in the harshest winters, sometimes outlaws come, men driven to robbery by hunger. This possibility, human predators exploiting winter vulnerability, adds a new dimension to the season's dangers. The family's rapid response suggests such threats are rare, but real enough to have established protocols for protection. You join Agnes at the window, catching glimpses of men gathering at the village center, some carrying torches that cast flickering light across the snow. From this distance, it's impossible to determine the nature of the emergency, but the gathering has the organized quality of a community accustomed to collective action in crisis. The minutes stretch tensely as you wait for news. The younger children huddle close to their grandmother, who continues the game as a distraction, but keeps her voice low and her attention divided between them and the door. The recovering child watches silently from her place by the fire, her eyes wide with anxiety. Finally, after what seems an eternity, but is probably less than an hour, 3 distinct knocks sound at the door, Thomas's signal. Agnes quickly removes the bar and admits him, his face ruddy from cold and exertion. Strangers at the south edge, he reports, warming his hands at the fire. 15 or more, with makeshift sleds carrying bundles. The steward sent riders to determine if they're from Oakwood like the others or a different settlement. Not outlaws, then? Agnes asks, the relief evident in her voice. Not likely, Thomas confirms. They had children with them and moved slowly. Desperate travelers, not raiders. Still, the watch is doubled tonight until we know more. This new arrival of refugees presents both humanitarian and practical challenges for the village. More hungry people means greater strain on already limited resources, yet medieval Christian values and basic human empathy demand assistance to those in dire need, especially in winter. The evening's brief period of relaxation has ended, replaced by a renewed awareness of winter's precarious balance between survival and disaster. Thomas must prepare for another night of watch duty. Agnes must consider how to further stretch their food supplies if more refugees are accommodated, and the entire household faces another night of anxiety over threats, both known and unknown. As darkness fully envelops the village, the family completes their evening rituals with a heightened sense of urgency. Prayers seem more fervent, the securing of the house more thorough, the banking of the fire more carefully executed to ensure it lasts through the night. Each action acknowledges that survival is never guaranteed, particularly in winter when the margin between life and death narrows to its thinnest point. You settle onto the sleeping platform with the family, the shared warmth of bodies providing both physical comfort and psychological reassurance. Thomas alone remains awake, preparing for his watch shift later in the night, his weathered face solemn in the dying firelight. As you drift towards sleep, you reflect on this 4th day of medieval winter with its complex interplay of challenges and adaptations. The social systems that initially seemed simple have revealed remarkable sophistication, from hunting permissions to trade networks, from emergency responses to resource distribution. What modern people might dismiss as primitive or inadequate actually represents finely tuned survival strategies developed over centuries of trial and error. Your last conscious thought before sleep claims you a newfound respect for these medieval villagers. Their lives may lack modern comforts and securities, but their resilience, knowledge, and community cohesion represent human adaptability at its most impressive. Perhaps there are lessons here that your own time has forgotten in its technological abundance, lessons about interdependence, resource management, and finding purpose even in the harshest conditions. Outside, the winter night deepens. Snow begins to fall again, gentle but persistent, covering the day's activities with a fresh white blanket. The village grows quiet, except for the occasional call between watchmen, their voices carrying clearly in the cold air, human signals of vigilance against winter's many dangers. Morning arrives with unexpected clarity. The storm has passed, leaving a crystalline blue sky that seems almost mockingly cheerful, given the challenges facing the village. The temperature has plummeted in the storm's wake, creating a bitter, bone-chilling cold that transforms breath instantly into clouds of white vapor. You awaken to find the house unusually quiet. Thomas has not yet returned from his night watch, and Agnes is already up, working silently by the fire. The children remain huddled under blankets, conserving both warmth and energy during these coldest morning hours. Only the recovering child is fully awake, her eyes following her mother's movements with alert interest, another positive sign in her healing process. The new travelers were indeed from Oakwood. Agnes informs you quietly, having received word from a neighbor who stopped by earlier. 23 souls, mostly women and children. The men of their household stayed behind to salvage what they could from their spoiled grain stores. This information carries both relief and concern. Not raiders or strangers, but known people from a neighboring settlement, yet still more mouths to feed from dwindling supplies. The delicate balance of winter survival shifts again, requiring new adjustments from every household. The Lord has called a village gathering at midday, Agnes continues, stirring the morning pottage. All households must send someone. The steward says it concerns both the refugees and the coming Candlemas preparations. The mention of Candlemas, the Christian feast falling on February 2nd that marks the presentation of Jesus at the temple and traditionally signals winter's midpoint, reminds you that even in the depths of medieval winter, people oriented themselves toward future hope. The festival, still weeks away, represented the promise that light and warmth would eventually return, that the dark days of January would not last forever. Thomas returns as the family is breaking their fast, his exhaustion evident in the slump of his shoulders and the dark circles beneath his eyes. 2 consecutive nights of watch duty have taken their toll, and he accepts a small bowl of pottage with the mechanical movements of a man operating on will alone. The new arrivals are settled in the church and guild hall, he reports between careful spoonfuls of hot food. Some are ill from exposure on the journey. Clara and the priest are tending them. This news silences the household momentarily. Illness introduced from outside could spread quickly through the closely quartered village, potentially creating a crisis worse than food shortages. The family's recent experience with their daughter's sickness has made them acutely aware of winter's health vulnerabilities. Will you attend the gathering, or shall I? Agnes asks Thomas practically, recognizing his need for rest. I must go, he responds, though his body clearly craves sleep. The steward hinted that new hunting permissions might be granted. We need my name recorded, if that's the case. This exchange highlights another aspect of medieval winter survival, the inability to fully rest when opportunities for resource acquisition present themselves. Missing the village meeting might mean missing critical permissions or allocations that could mean the difference between sufficiency and hunger in the weeks ahead. After the simple meal, the household organizes for the day's tasks. Despite the gathering at midday, essential work cannot be neglected. Animals still need tending, water must be fetched, and the fire maintained. With Thomas needing rest before the meeting, these responsibilities fall to Agnes and the older children, with you helping where possible. The bitter cold makes even simple chores dangerous today. Water freezes almost instantly when spilled, creating treacherous ice patches around the house. Metal tools become hazards, sticking to exposed skin and potentially causing serious tissue damage. The chicken's water freezes solid within an hour of being placed in their enclosure, requiring frequent replacement. These extreme conditions reveal another layer of winter knowledge, understanding how to function safely when temperatures drop to their lowest points. Agnes demonstrates techniques developed through generations of experience, warming metal tools briefly by the fire before handling them outdoors, wrapping hands in layers of cloth with only fingertips exposed for necessary tasks, moving deliberately to avoid falls on ice, and recognizing the early warning signs of frostbite. When your skin turns white and feels numb, return to the fire immediately, she instructs as you help with outdoor tasks. If it turns dark or blisters, the flesh may be lost. This matter-of-fact description of frostbite's progression reflects the medieval familiarity with cold injuries, common enough to be understood in detail, but serious enough to require vigilant prevention. By mid-morning, the extraordinary cold has driven most village activities indoors. Smoke rises straight up from each house in the still air, and few people venture out except for absolute necessities. The rare passerby moves with purpose, face wrapped against the cold, stopping neither for conversation nor rest until reaching their destination. Inside, the family uses this weather-imposed confinement productively. Agnes sets up her loom near the fire, beginning a new length of cloth that will eventually become a tunic for her growing son. The older girl continues spinning, building up the thread supply needed for weaving. Thomas, having rested briefly, works on carving replacement spoons to rebuild their trading stock, while the grandmother teaches the younger children a string game that develops both dexterity and pattern recognition. These indoor activities represent more than mere time filling. They are essential production work that maintains the household economy. A medieval family cannot simply purchase new clothing or implements when needed. They must create most necessities themselves through continuous, year-round effort. Winter's confinement actually provides valuable time for this production, transforming a seasonal hardship into an economic opportunity. As midday approaches, Thomas prepares to attend the village gathering. Though still visibly tired, he dons his cleanest tunic and smooths his beard as best he can. Small gestures of respect for the formal nature of a meeting called by the Lord himself. Agnes adjusts his collar and brushes stray rushes from his clothing, her practical hands finding ways to present her husband at his best, despite their limited resources. Listen carefully about the Candlemas arrangements, she reminds him. If they need rushes for new candles, we might gather some from the south field, and find out if the Lord's cook will want eggs. Our hens are laying better than most with the shelter you built them. This planning reflects the family's constant attention to potential opportunities. Candlemas, with its tradition of candle making and blessing, might provide both spiritual comfort and practical economic advantage if they can supply needed materials or food. Thomas departs for the meeting, promising to return with full details. In his absence, the household continues their indoor work, conversation naturally turning to speculation about what the Lord might announce. The older boy hopes for extended hunting permissions, the girl for news of a skilled weaver who might take her as an apprentice next year, and the grandmother for assurance that spring planting can proceed despite the refugee situation. Their varied concerns illuminate the complex web of hopes and anxieties that characterize medieval life. Even in the midst of immediate winter survival challenges, people maintain longer-term perspectives, planning for future seasons and life transitions that seem distant but require preparation nonetheless. The sick child, continuing to gain strength, joins the conversation with her own hope that the Candlemas celebration might include the special sweet bread that the priest's housekeeper sometimes makes, flavored with honey and dried fruit. This innocent wish for a simple pleasure amidst hardship brings gentle smiles to adult faces, reminding them that children's resilience often expresses itself through such modest desires. When Thomas returns from the meeting, his face shows mixed emotions, neither the full relief of good news nor the resignation of disaster, but something more complicated. The family pauses in their work, waiting for his report as he warms himself by the fire. The Lord has extended hunting permissions for another week. He begins with the most immediately relevant information. Any man may take small game from the north and west woods, though deer remain restricted except for organized parties. This announcement brings visible relief. Extended hunting rights mean additional protein sources crucial for winter survival, especially with extra mouths to feed in the village. Agnes nods with satisfaction, already mentally adjusting food plans to include potential fresh meat. The newcomers will stay through Candlemas at least, Thomas continues. The Lord has granted them temporary work in exchange for food and shelter. The men to help clear woodlands for spring planting, the women to assist with cloth production and candle making for the festival. This arrangement represents medieval pragmatism at its best, finding productive roles for refugees that benefit both them and the host community while maintaining social order. By assigning specific tasks with clear compensation, the Lord has transformed potential burdens into temporary assets. And there's more, Thomas adds, his expression softening slightly. The Lord's wife has arrived with their household. She's brought a physician from the town who will examine the sick among both villagers and refugees. Any child under 10 years showing signs of recovery from winter fever is to be brought to the manor tomorrow for assessment and strengthening remedies. This news brings an audible gasp from Agnes, and her eyes immediately go to her recovering daughter. The intervention of a trained physician, rare and normally inaccessible to peasants, represents extraordinary good fortune. While village healers like Claire possessed valuable empirical knowledge and herbal wisdom, a physician would have formal education based on ancient medical texts, potentially offering treatments beyond local capabilities. There's a cost, surely, Agnes asks, her practical mind seeking the catch in this seemingly generous offer. Thomas nods. Any household receiving the physician's treatment must provide additional labor at planting time, 3 extra days for each child treated, and we must supply a chicken for the physician's payment. The cost is significant but fair by medieval standards, valuable medical care exchanged for future labor and a meaningful food contribution. The family exchanges glances, silently calculating whether they can afford this price. The chicken represents a substantial portion of their livestock and future egg production, while additional spring labor means time away from their own essential planting. We will manage, Agnes decides finally, straightforward maternal concern overriding economic caution. Her health is worth more than a chicken and extra work. This decision, prioritizing the child's recovery over material considerations, might seem obvious to modern sensibilities, but it represents a carefully weighted choice in medieval reality. The chicken's protein and egg production capacity throughout spring and summer must be balanced against the child's improved health prospects and future productive capacity. That Agnes chooses treatment reveals both maternal love and pragmatic investment in her daughter's future contributions to family survival. As afternoon progresses into evening, Thomas shares more details from the meeting. Candlemas preparations will begin next week, with households assigned specific responsibilities: candle making, church cleaning, preparing special foods for blessing, and creating decorations from evergreen branches and preserved berries. Our household is to provide rushes for candle wicks and assist with the church cleaning, he informs Agnes, and the children are asked to join in singing during the blessing ceremony. This involvement in festival preparation represents more than religious obligation. Community celebrations provided essential psychological relief during winter's darkest period, creating shared purpose and anticipation that helped combat the isolation and monotony of cold confinement. Even simple tasks like gathering rushes or rehearsing songs took on increased significance when connected to communal ceremony. The evening meal is enlivened by this news and by a small addition to their usual fare: Thomas has traded some of his wood carving skill for a handful of dried apples from a neighbor's store. The wrinkled, leathery fruit pieces are added to the pottage pot, infusing the otherwise plain stew with unexpected sweetness that transforms the humble meal into something approaching a feast. As they eat, the family discusses tomorrow's visit to the manor for the child's medical examination. None of them has been inside the Lord's residence before, and speculation about its rumored comforts occupies the children's imagination. Tales of glass windows, tapestries for warmth, and multiple fireplaces seem almost mythical compared to their single-room dwelling. Mind your manners and speak only when spoken to, Agnes instructs, knowing that proper behavior before social superiors is crucial, and thank both the physician and the Lord's wife for their charity. The formalities of medieval social interaction across class boundaries were strict and consequential. Peasants who showed appropriate deference might receive additional consideration in times of need, while perceived disrespect could result in withdrawn privileges or even punishment. Children learned these unwritten rules through careful parental coaching before significant interactions with nobility. As night falls, the extreme cold intensifies further. The fire requires constant attention to maintain adequate warmth, and water left in containers begins to freeze even indoors, except right beside the flames. The family adjusts their sleeping arrangement, moving the platform slightly closer to the fire and adding extra layers of straw beneath their bedding for insulation from the cold floor. Thomas, exhausted from consecutive night watches, falls asleep almost immediately after the evening meal. The rest of the family follows soon after, conserving energy and warmth through earlier bedtime, another adaptive winter strategy. You remain awake slightly longer, observing how the grandmother places heated stones wrapped in cloth near the sick child's feet, a simple but effective thermal technology that predates modern heating pads by centuries. Sleep comes quickly in the profound darkness of medieval winter night, but you're awakened some hours later by urgent movement within the house. Agnes is up, adding wood to the fire and checking on her daughter, whose coughing has resumed with concerning intensity. The cold has deepened her chest congestion. Agnes whispers, noting your wakefulness. I'm making steam with herbs to ease her breathing. You watch as she boils water with dried thyme and other herbs, creating aromatic steam that she carefully directs toward her daughter's face, using a piece of bark as a channel. This respiratory therapy, surprisingly similar to modern humidifier treatments, indicates sophisticated empirical understanding of how moisture can relieve congestion long before the scientific explanation was understood. The treatment continues through the darkest hours, with Agnes maintaining both fire and steam without complaint, despite her own obvious fatigue. This nighttime caregiving, invisible in historical records but essential to family survival, represents the often unacknowledged labor that sustained medieval households through winter crises. By dawn, the child's breathing has eased again, though Agnes's face shows the cost of her night-long vigil. The new day brings marginally less severe cold. Still bitter but no longer the extreme temperature that made even indoor activities dangerous. The family rises to face what will be an unusual day by their standards, a visit to the manor house and interaction with both physician and nobility. Preparations begin immediately after the morning meal. The sick child is dressed in her cleanest clothing, with extra care taken to wash her face and hands and smooth her hair. Agnes changes her own worn apron for a slightly better one, and Thomas puts on his good tunic saved for church and formal occasions. Even the other children are instructed to clean themselves more thoroughly than usual, as they may be visible to the Lord's household. These preparations reflect the importance of appearances in medieval social interactions. While nobility understood that peasants would be simply dressed, cleanliness and care with available resources demonstrated respect and self-discipline, qualities valued across the social spectrum. The walk to the manor represents a significant undertaking for the still recovering child. Thomas fashions a simple sledge from wood and rope that can be pulled over the snow, allowing her to rest when walking becomes too difficult. This practical solution to transportation challenges exemplifies the everyday ingenuity required in a world without readily available vehicles or fuel. The manor house, when you finally approach it, stands in stark contrast to the village dwellings. Built of stone rather than wattle and daub, with multiple chimneys signaling several heated rooms, its two-story structure dominates the landscape. Glass windows, small but real, glint in the winter sun, and smoke rises steadily from multiple hearths, suggesting warmth unimaginable in the peasant homes. Your group is not alone in seeking the physician's help. Several other families with recovering children have gathered in the manor's outer yard, creating an impromptu community of shared hope and anxiety. Conversation remains subdued, however. This is the Lord's domain, where peasants moderate their voices and maintain careful awareness of their subordinate status. A steward eventually emerges to organize the waiting families, arranging them in order of arrival and explaining the process. The physician will see each child briefly. He informs them with the slightly elevated diction of someone accustomed to authority. Those requiring treatment will remain for further examination. Payment must be presented before treatment begins. Thomas produces their designated chicken, a healthy hen wrapped in cloth to keep it calm, and hands it to a manor servant who records the contribution in a small ledger. This formal documentation of payment represents the increasingly bureaucratic nature of late medieval society, where even charitable arrangements required proper recording for future reference. When their turn arrives, you accompany Agnes, Thomas, and their daughter into the manor's great hall, a space more impressive than any building you've encountered in your medieval winter experience. A massive fireplace dominates one wall, providing heat that feels almost excessive after the constant chill of the peasant house. Rushlights and precious beeswax candles illuminate the space far more brightly than the family dwelling, and colorful tapestries cover stone walls, providing both decoration and additional insulation. The physician awaits near the fire, his status immediately apparent from his clothing. A fur-lined robe of dyed wool, leather shoes rather than rough boots, and most distinctively, a cap marking his university education. Beside him stands a noblewoman who must be the Lord's wife, her clothing similarly indicating wealth through quality fabric, decorative embroidery, and multiple layers unneeded for warmth alone. The examination proceeds with professional efficiency. The physician questions Agnes about the child's symptoms, course of illness, and treatments already administered. He listens to the girl's breathing using a hollow tube placed against her chest, an early stethoscope-like device, and examines her throat and eyes with careful attention. The country remedies were well chosen, he pronounces finally, addressing his comment primarily to the Lord's wife rather than the parents, a subtle reinforcement of social hierarchy. The child shows good recovery, though her lungs remain congested. I recommend a strengthening syrup of honey, coltsfoot, and white horehound, with warm wine administered in small amounts for 3 days. This treatment represents a combination of effective herbal medicine and luxury ingredients inaccessible to peasant households. Honey, while occasionally available to villagers, was precious and typically reserved for special purposes. Wine was entirely beyond their means, a beverage for ecclesiastical and noble consumption. The Lord's wife nods approvingly at the prescription and speaks directly to Agnes for the first time. The treatment will be provided from our stores, good woman. Your daughter shows strong constitution to have survived the lung fever so well. With proper care, she should recover fully by spring planting. This interaction, brief but significant, demonstrates noblesse oblige in action. The lady's acknowledgement of the child's strength offers maternal recognition across class boundaries, while her reference to spring planting subtly reinforces the expectation that the girl will return to productive labor as part of the family's obligation to the manor. Before departing, Agnes and Thomas express formal thanks, carefully phrased to acknowledge both the generosity of the treatment and their acceptance of the labor obligation it creates. The scripted nature of this exchange reflects the complex social contract of medieval feudalism, protection and occasional charity from above, deference and service from below, each reinforcing established order. You exit the manor with the prescribed medicine, a substantial glass bottle containing dark syrup and a smaller flask of watered wine, both representing significant value in medieval terms. The family's mood is noticeably lighter as Thomas pulls the sledge carrying their daughter and the precious remedies back toward the village. The physician said Clara chose well, Agnes remarks with obvious pride in the village healer's knowledge being validated by formal education. This respect for local wisdom alongside acceptance of hierarchical authority characterizes the medieval mind's comfort with multiple knowledge systems coexisting without contradiction. The return journey passes the village church, where preparations for Candlemas have already begun. Villagers with assigned tasks work under the priest's direction, gathering evergreen branches, cleaning church interiors, and preparing beeswax for special candles. The festival, though still days away, provides focus and purpose during winter's difficult final stretch, a light at the end of the seasonal tunnel. Back at the family dwelling, the day's excitement has exhausted the recovering child, who falls asleep almost immediately after receiving her first dose of the physician's remedy. The other family members return to their regular tasks, winter's demands continuing regardless of special events or treatments. As afternoon turns to evening, visitors arrive, neighbors coming to hear about the manor visit and physician's assessment. This informal information sharing represents another survival mechanism, as experiences with authority and medical knowledge are distributed throughout the community via social networks. Each family adds their observations, creating collective wisdom greater than any individual encounter. One visitor brings surprising news that spreads quickly through the village. 2 of the refugee families have received permission to remain permanently, taking over a farmstead abandoned last summer when its occupants died of fever. This development will transform strangers into neighbors, requiring integration into the village's social and economic systems over coming seasons. They'll need seed grain and tools, Thomas comments pragmatically after the visitors depart, and help raising a proper dwelling before planting time. This matter-of-fact acceptance of the community's responsibility to newly settled members reflects medieval society's understanding that sustainable survival required mutual aid. A household unable to establish itself properly would eventually become a burden. Better to provide initial support that enables self-sufficiency.